Zvijac, orthopedic surgeon in South Florida for Baptist Health South Florida. And we're here today to talk about all of the issues regarding COVID-19 and the changes that have occurred, mainly in the high school athletic world, but also what has happened in terms of conditioning and returning back to play and the concerns regarding returning back to play over the next few weeks.
Hi, I'm Frankie Ruiz. I am head cross-country coach over at Belen Jesuit High School now for the last 18 years. I also run a lot of the local run clubs, so one might say I'm interested in helping the kids get back to playing and running out there.
So the COVID-19 pandemic, as you all know, has been going on for the last several months and basically shut sports down in the high school world back in March. These are times where people were in full season, they were playing baseball and all the other spring sports, but also a lot of the off-season sports, for example, football would be in conditioning. They would be doing different drills. Actually, here in South Florida, we have spring football, so they'd be preparing for spring football games or jamborees, and it'd be a lot of education and conditioning that was going on. In addition, we've also, over the summer, would have been doing a lot of things in terms of conditioning, dealing with heat regulation, and preparing for the upcoming fall season. With the pandemic, all of this has changed. We've stopped this on a formal level, and this has been very concerning in that although we have a very high IQ sports-wise with our coaches and our athletic trainers here in South Florida, there's been a big issue because a lot of these athletes are at different levels now of conditioning, return to play. A lot of education that would have occurred is gone, and we have to ramp back up. The student athletes get affected directly by a variety of means, the most important of which is they're not with their friends and colleagues. They're not getting the education. They're not getting the conditioning and coaching that is so valuable to them as they're going through these growing years. And in a short-term issue, it's the difference between losing a lot of the things that we deal with in terms of sports. I'm sure Frankie will talk about if somebody hasn't run for 6 months and they go back to running, all of a sudden, a lot of these things that you take for granted are gone, and you have to re-educate and retrain these in the older athletes. And more importantly, we're dealing with a lot of young people that are coming in for the very first time. So you're talking about 9th graders and 10th graders coming into the variety of sports, and these are valuable times for coaching that kind of get lost.
This pandemic has certainly affected my runners as well as I think all runners across the country for that matter. There's some runners that are I would say a little more self-driven and self-disciplined that have been able to kind of maintain some of the conditioning from their spring season, their spring track season, and that has been, I would say, less the story than not. The majority of the kids, need the coaches constantly asking them either to meet physically or to stay on top of them. We've done a pretty decent job, but I got to say it's certainly unprecedented as a coach to be dealing with not only new kids moving into high school in my case, or trying the sport altogether, as well as keeping the anxiety levels low for the avid or the experienced runner that was looking to possibly get noticed for college. So that's put a little more emotional stress on the kids, and therefore the coach having to manage some of that and hoping that they don't do too much too soon. The coach should assume as if this was an athlete that has been injured. I mean, let's just almost take it that way. An athlete that may have, some catastrophic injury that may have left him out of the sport for 6 months. That's the way that coach has to approach nearly every athlete here. And, or I should say, even the athletes should approach the sport that way as well. And so, yeah, the fundamentals are definitely one of those things: the volume, the intensity, the duration of rest in between those different intensities. All those things should be taken into account. And then not to mention the South Florida weather as well, affecting how quickly they might ramp back up into their normal training. And then obviously those avid kids is managing their expectations a bit. And I think as coaches, we have a tremendous responsibility here to advise kids to be a little more patient with their development.
Yeah, I agree with you, Frank. I think you said this beautifully. There's a lot of issues at hand, and the most important of which is you're dealing with athletes that are going to be at very different levels, I believe. One is, as you said, people that have had the opportunity to be working through the summer, and others that probably haven't and have gone anywhere from nothing to intermittent workouts, or maybe workouts that they've felt comfortable with, or they saw on an internet video. We haven't had quite the coaching that we need over the summer. And one of the things that you see in high school athletes especially is they believe that they can go from 0 to 100 in a second, and that's going to be a big issue moving forward. I think the other point that you bring out very nicely is, we deal with temperature issues and humidity issues here, and those are things that we've worked very nicely before this season into our schedules, into the work and education of getting ready to play sport, with the different breaks and timing and when we do things. And all of that's going to be starting from square one again. And I've said this many times, obviously we're very fortunate here in South Florida, and that we have our coaching staffs at all the sports have a very high IQ when it comes to that type of thing, as well as our athletic trainers having very high IQ and keeping an eye on this. But we're really it's not everybody coming together as a group like we're very used to, coming from spring into the summer, into the fall. We've gone from stopping in the spring to starting in the fall, and a lot of the coaches may not know some of these new athletes, and that's going to be a factor also.
Yeah, not only don't the coaches know some of these athletes, but the kids themselves may not expect, little Johnny to be now big Johnny and whatnot, and feel like they're falling behind now because someone on their team that they didn't necessarily expect to be as good as they've become, either because maybe they were working during the off, or the quarantine period, or they just got, they just got bigger, or they went through puberty. And sometimes I see kids, in June, and I meet them again in September, and I can't even recognize them because of the changes, the rapid changes that some of them go through at this stage in their life. So
yeah. I think it's a very good point. We see this quite a bit, and you had mentioned before about these student athletes and maybe getting scholarships. And, we always talk about the big time people that have been around a little bit, they know, yeah, these colleges know these kids, but there's a lot of late bloomers that all of a sudden senior year comes, and, a lot of schools all of a sudden coming down to look at one student athlete and they see another. And it's amazing how many times that happens and how big that is and how important it is. A lot of education gets covered by that, and that's a big concern today regarding all of those thoughts. Dealing with a lot of the public high schools and inner city schools, the high school breakfast and lunch programs are basically what they eat and where they get their nutrition throughout the day. And to not have that for extended months now, although again, I think the Dade County school system has done a phenomenal job of trying to get these foods packages to the student athletes and all the children, but it is a concern. And again, that's another thing that's a big variable that we're not used to dealing with. We usually take that for granted, and not have that for the last several months. This isn't a week or two. This has been going on since March. Is a big concern. The things that I believe we're going to have to really keep the student athletes focused on is that they can't go from 0 to 100, that they have to follow the protocol to get into proper conditioning and proper fitness and proper form before they go back to whatever their sport may be, and then follow the normal routine once we get to that point. So we're going to teach patience here this year, that we didn't always have to do?
So, and I would, and Dr. Zvijac, you bring up that word patience as far as advice is concerned. Absolutely, I think coaches, athletes, my advice to runners, whether they're new runners or not, definitely patience is a big one there. And with that patience, I would encourage athletes and coaches to look at the athlete as a whole. Let's not just treat them like a race car, and let's just say, all right, let's put the fuel in there and let's hit the gas. No, let's look at the big picture. Let's look at everything from the emotional side, the anxiety, the equipment, even everything that surrounds that athlete's life, the environment that we're in now. Whether it's being threatened by a hurricane and that affecting practices or affecting conditioning, to when their actual competitions actually begin. I like to tell my athletes that we're training to train during this period of time, and some athletes always see it as, well, I'm just training to compete. And I think right now, especially with the uncertainty, you might as well just approach the season or this conditioning season as a season of training, so that you could be better at training. Some in my case, or in running, cross country's case, they haven't seen a start line since March, and so that's a long period of time for an athlete that's been running for the last 10 or 12 years of their high school and middle school career. And so I think there's that patience. There's definitely that looking at that athlete as a whole, and seeing the person, or I should say, seeing your training as a training to get better at training.
Frank, let me ask you a question. I know you have a elite program, and a lot of times you go outside the area to get your competition. What do you feel in terms of doing that this year, with the fact that maybe places are running a regular schedule as opposed to what you've had to go through?
Yeah, that's certainly putting a little stress on us as a program. That we know that there are teams north of the Palm Beach line that have been meeting up regularly, and we know we're going to have to travel to see some of these teams soon. And so obviously the travel arrangements and all the guidelines that go with traveling this time around, it won't be putting 20 kids in a school van. It's going to be putting parents here to drive them, or doing some other. I haven't yet figured that whole travel arrangement situation out, but it has created a little anxiety here. We do know that some teams are meeting, but from a competitive standpoint, it does seem to be like AAU meets are being held, and other club team meets are being held. So as a school, we definitely recognize that, and I think I've even seen some of the forums locally here with some of the public school coaches. They're getting a little anxious too, and they're talking about forming club teams. So I think I don't know. I think our local district here, FHSA, has to be aware that the kids are going to find a way to play or run one way or another. Parents are certainly pretty determined, so we have to tamper down a little bit of the parents' anxiety as well. And travel is going to be a big concern for us, for sure.
I'm seeing it a lot in baseball also. A lot of the summer leagues have basically picked right back up, and I'm seeing an awful lot of injuries because, again, they stopped in March, and then in the last several weeks they've gone right back. It was like there was no ramp up, and I'm seeing an awful lot of student athletes, high school guys mainly, but also some collegiate level players that are having all kinds of issues for those same reasons. So again, I think it says a lot about our area and the coaching knowledge of what needs to be done. But clearly, we're seeing a lot of kids from across the state. Actually, I've had a lot of kids from up in Jacksonville that have come down to see me, and they've had all kinds of issues when they went from 0 to 100 again. So it's going to be trying times.
Yeah, I think again, I I'm assuming, well, not now because we've been at it for a little bit, but I assumed, you know, that the kids were injured, you know, coming back from an injury. So I used that 50% rule the first couple of weeks, and then which is for those that don't know what the 50% rule is that when they come after coming back from a catastrophic injury of sorts, is definitely those first couple of weeks. And as far as running is concerned, they'd be at 50% of the volume when they first started. Not when they left off, but when they first started their workouts. And then from there, we move to 30% and 20% and eventually 10%. And so by 6 to 8 weeks, they're back, hopefully at full volume and full intensity. I shouldn't say intensity, but volume is definitely one thing we ramp up quickly. So.
Well, I can tell you that it's been a very interesting and challenging time, but you know, from this, you always learn a lot, and you learn a lot about people's ability to pivot and come up with new ideas of how to return to any activity. And sports here in South Florida, I've seen a lot of very ingenious techniques from the coaches and athletic trainers on how to get people. They were possibly, for example, going through injury rehabilitation, and they've done a great job with using all the technology that's available to do home rehabilitation to get them back. I've seen that with coaches setting up programs for a variety of sports. And so with every challenge comes a lot of positives at the back end. And I think we're going to see that from this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, final thoughts from my end, I think are encouraging coaches, athletes, parents, all to communicate a little more, let them know what's going on, talk through the anxiety of possibly being concerned of being left behind a bit in some cases, talk through how the conditioning is actually progressing, be as you know, as readily available to address those speed bumps along the way. And then I'd also encourage you know, athletes and coaches both to reach out to other programs, reach out to other coaches, and share ideas, because like Dr. Zvijac was saying, this is definitely a time to learn as coaches and as athletes. You know, we've never been here before. So I think collectively, though, there's definitely more intelligence than everyone operating in a vacuum. So, you know, I appreciate Baptist Health and everyone that is sharing their ideas. And I know there's plenty of doctors like Dr. Zvijac that are really invested in the not only the health and wellness of our athletes, but the performance. I mean, we're pretty darn good down here in South Florida with the high school athletics. So it has a lot to do with the medical professionals behind us. So thank you, Dr. Zvijac and Baptist Health for all the support.
Thank you, Frank.